Towards the end of the meeting, the doctors told me there's also some evidence that it could be helpful for PTSD. It's been my postulate for a long time that I think the vast majority of PTSD is actually traumatic brain injury, just simply the culmination of symptoms that come from having a dysfunctional brain that's been beaten around and jiggled around and all that other stuff.
Today on our show, we're having Dr. Kirk Parsley, Kirk Parsley's Sleep Remedy. Kirk and I would say we go way back. Kirk is also a former Navy SEAL. Kirk, I'll let you tell your story, but
sleep expert,
yeah, exactly.
Friend, father, doctor, teammate, so many things, and such a huge part of the vet story, and a story that probably many people don't know. And launching this show, whatever it turns out to be, Marcus and I really want to honor and recognize those that were core to the mission. And so having you on, Sarah Wilkinson, Mikal Vega, I'm sure will be a guest down the road. It's such an honor. Kirk,
well,
thanks
I appreciate
for being
it,
here.
I'm happy to be a part of it. And what you two have done is amazing. I mean, you've brought a level of professionalism and credibility to this that has thus far eluded this industry, and I think y'all are going to end up being responsible for saving a lot of lives and a lot of families and a lot of heartache and a lot of suffering in general. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, you're such a huge part of this. And of course, we have a mutual friend that was another huge piece of this puzzle. And, he's asked us not to share his story or his identity. And we've always respected that. But I want to honor him too, and his family for the role that they played. And they knew that we were struggling, but they were like the only people who really knew. And I was sharing, some of our struggles. His wife reached out to me and said, there's this thing in Mexico and her husband had done it. And you were part of that. And so I worked with them in getting Marcus to go. And it was about a year that it took. So I was working with them. They were working with you. And Marcus was very reluctant to commit. But I would love for you to tell, how did you hear about this? Because I trusted them. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't need to know anything about it. I trusted them and they trusted you. So this line of trust is very important in the community. How did you find this?
Yeah, so I've told this story many times. He told me I could. But I'm just gonna be careful around it because of the way we brought this in. A brief background for me, for anybody who doesn't know, which is probably everybody listening. I joined the Navy right out of high school. I was a Navy SEAL back when BUDS was hard and SEALs were tough, and we had wooden boats instead of IBSs and all that. And and I got out. And I went to college, not really knowing what I was going to do. Eventually decided to go to medical school. And then when it came time to apply to medical school, I found out the military had their own medical school. I was already married. I already had a kid, had another kid on the way. So it was kind of a no-brainer to get paid to go to medical school instead of the other way around. And so I decided to do that. And I figured I'd get to go back to the teams and, give back to the community that had definitely shaped me as a man, probably kept me out of prison or worse. And I did. And, when I got back there, I had been gone for quite a while, but there were still plenty of guys there who I'd trained with and deployed with. And so, went through BUDS with and all that. And so, so they trusted me enough to come tell me the real story, like what was really going on with them. Usually they don't want to because, the doctor's going to disqualify them from their job. So put them on medical hold or something. So they usually don't tell us anything. But, the guys trusted me. And so I had a good relationship with those folks. And our friend in question had come back to the West Coast and was working at BUDS. And, we kind of reunited during that time. And then towards the end of my time there, which ended in January of 13. So towards the end of my time there, being the SEAL doc, everybody wants to come and prove their secret sauce, special equipment or whatever to you if they can get the endorsement of the SEALs. It's a great marketing claim for them, but also I think there's some genuine patriotism too, and people want to help out the SEALs and all that. So I constantly got pitched by people who wanted to show me their gizmo or their supplement or their technique or whatever. And a couple of doctors called me and invited me out to lunch. We went down to the Coronado Brewing Company, had lunch, and they proceeded to tell me about this compound called ibogaine. And they were pitching it to me for opiate addiction, because that's what it had basically been studied for. And I knew literally like one SEAL who had any problems with that, and it wasn't truly an opiate. It was just it was a different pain medication, so it wasn't a real big need of mine. And so I listened to them, and I was kind of like everybody else. I kind of thought all the psychedelic stuff is just an excuse to get high and call it spiritual or whatever, magic, and it's really just an escape kind of thing. But I was ignorant of it. And so anyway, towards the end of the meeting, they told me, well, there's also some evidence that it could be helpful for PTSD. And then I was interested, and I was like, okay, well, that actually interests me, because it's been my postulate for a long time that I think the vast majority of PTSD is actually traumatic brain injury, and in the syndrome is just simply the culmination of symptoms that come from having a dysfunctional brain that's been beaten around and jiggled around and all that other stuff. So I was interested at that point. I went back and did a little research on my own, and found out, hey, this stuff could be dangerous. There's been a couple of deaths with this stuff, and then in fact, the couple of deaths that were documented, the guys who took me to lunch were the supervising doctors.
Oh, boy.
I was like, well,
Wow.
that's not a great thing, right? I'm a little less excited about it. And then I'll just add in a caveat that's super important is Mikal Vega, who I know is comfortable with us sharing his story. He had been on the West Coast as his med board was getting him out of the military, and he came to my office every day, curmudgeon, angry, complaining about the system and how wrong he's been treated and all this other stuff, and just sat in my office and vented all day, every day. And I didn't really know him. Like I got to know him there. I didn't know him before I was the doctor there. And he was a big, intimidating, angry dude. And I thought, if anybody's ever going to murder suicide in my office, it's this guy, So I was a little afraid of him, to be honest. And he came in my office every day, and hours a day, every day for probably his last 6 months in the military. And then he got out, and I did what I could for him, but I could do very little. He was on so many different medications from the hospital that who knows what was going on with his brain and body. And I did my best to help him, but I don't think I was very helpful. And then he got out, and his y'all know his story. He basically said, I'm not going to die this way. I'm going to figure out something else. So he takes all of his medications and throws them in the toilet and gets on a plane and flies to Peru and lives in the Amazon jungle with a shaman for 30 days and does ayahuasca every other night or something, or a couple of nights a week or something, and does Kundalini yoga all day. And then I see him 6 months later at one of the fundraisers those annual fundraisers at Dick's Last Resort. He comes and he sits across the table from me and he starts talking to me. And of course, I was the doctor for like 3,000 guys, right? So plenty of time I didn't know who people were right away. But after I talk to you for a minute or two, it'll pop in my head, make a connection. So I talked to him for probably 25 minutes and had no idea who he was. And he finally said something that clued me in, but it still didn't look like him to me. And I was like, Hooch? And he said, who do you think I was? I said, I don't know. I still don't think you're a hooch. You still don't look like hooch to me. For one thing, you have blue eyes, and I know that hooch had black eyes, like right, just pure black eyes. And so anyway, he tells me the story of what he's done. And, he's probably shed 40, 50 pounds. I don't know. But affect was different. Posture was different. Facial expression was different. Mood was definitely different. Speech patterns, like it seemed like everything about the guy was completely different. Now, granted, he was on a dozen psychotropic drugs when I knew him as well, too, right? So you can add that to it. But I at least said, okay, well, that makes me a little more curious about the power of psychedelics. And so, fast forward a little bit, and our mutual friend's wife calls me and says, hey, he's locked himself in the house and he's writing a suicide note, essentially. And so I go over there, and he doesn't want to let me in either. He was my best friend all through training. We were roommates all through buds. And he doesn't want to let me in. He's telling me he's going to shoot me through the door if I don't leave. And and you know him, so it's like, yeah, that's a very realistic possibility. and I remember just sitting there going, could I live with myself if I drive off and he shoots himself? And I'm like, all right, well, shoot me through the door. And he lets me in, and and he's like, don't say a word, and I don't. And we sit on the couch for probably 3 hours and don't talk at all. We watch baseball. I hate baseball. I know nothing about it, and I just sit there and stare at the screen. And he finally starts talking, and then, we get into a little bit of what he's going through and what he's thinking. And, and he lays out his rationale for me, and it's honestly pretty solid, man. I mean, it really is. It's like, it's not tangential crazy, what people think of when guys are ready to end it. There was nothing illogical about it. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't on drugs. He was very matter of fact, like, here's why I'm ending it, and here's why it's better for everybody. Here's why it's better for my wife. Here's why it's better for my kids, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, but none of us want you to be dead. that's the bad part. And I don't think you really want to be dead either. You just don't want to be struggling anymore. And I said, so there's this thing down in Mexico, and to be clear, he'd been through all the same treatment that Mikal Vega had been through, right? He'd been through all the traditional Western stuff, and he'd taken all those medications, and he'd been through all the different therapies, and, been through the treatment center, the big treatment center, that we all know about. And I said, all right, so there's this thing down in Mexico, and it might be able to help you. I don't know. To be honest, it's a little dangerous. It could kill you, but since you're going to kill yourself anyway, like, what would you have to lose, right? Like, maybe there's a chance of this. And so, and y'all know him well enough to know what a difficult time I had talking him into this. This was a multiple hour conversation. And literally the sun was up the sun had been up for hours by the time we finally got this decision made. And he's like, okay, but nobody else can be there. I gotta be the only one. And I said, well, I need to bring somebody because I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea what we're getting into. I haven't done a lot of research, and what I did do was months ago. So, let's just let me bring one guy. And he said, okay. And so I called Mikal because he's the only guy I know who knows anything about anything similar. And I said, hey, here's the deal. I explained everything to him, and I said, and I need your help because I don't know what I'm getting into, and I have no way of being able to talk to him about what he's going to experience, and I don't know if they're going to be helpful. And so would you be willing to help? And he says, I'll do it. And this was happening like that day, right? So we turned this whole thing around. This was a Friday. We called, Crossroads at the time, and we booked the entire center. I think it was 6 beds, and so we said, all right, we need to be the only ones there. So we went down there, and he was all, being him and brooding in the back seat when we're waiting to pick up Mikal at the train station. He's like, who's this guy again? And I said, well, he changed his name because he's an actor in Hollywood now. I can't remember
I
what
bet
his
that
name
went
used
over
to
real
be.
well.
That's a good start to it.
Right. And and I said he changed his name, but I don't know. He was in combatives. His nickname was Hooch, and so he gets in the car and he's he's just kind of staring him down and not paying any attention and grumping and I said to Mikal, I said, "Hey Mikal, what's your real name?" And he said, "Mikal is my real name. I changed it legally." And I was like, "All right, prick, like what was your name before you changed it?" And he goes, "Well, wait a second. Don't you know the story of my name, why I changed my name?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, it's a contraction of my swim buddy's name in Buds." And and he died, and in his honor, I made my name a contraction of his name. And he says the guy's name, and I don't know if I should say that or not, so I'm not going to, but he says the guy's name. And then our buddy, who's going down for treatment, looks at him and he says, "I repatriated him." And then, boom, these guys are connected. And I was like, all right, well, that's one hell of a coincidence right there. And so we go down there and, we do the treatment, and, he comes out of it the next morning looking like he was, I don't know, 20 years younger. He looks like the guy that I met when I was 18 years old. We know he rarely smiled, never laughed, almost, right? And he was, just had this ear to ear grin. Had his, he has, until then, again, another one of the guys that I kind of forgotten. He has really big, bright blue eyes, which you didn't think of him as having blue eyes. You think of him as having really dark eyes and really intense, angry looks. And he's just happy, and he's light, and his eyes are big and open. He looks younger. We stayed the night there because they were going to do the 5-MeO the next day, and so we had the whole facility to ourselves, and we were in two little hospital beds next to each other. And they'd pulled the curtain around, and it was almost exactly the same size as our room in Buds. And I said, "Hey man, we're in the wrong beds." And he goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "That's my bed by the window. This is yours." And he goes, "Oh my God, you're right. Do you want to switch beds?" And I'm like, "No, I was just kidding." But then we start talking about Buds, and all of a sudden he's remembering all these guys we went through Buds with, and remembering all these stories that I don't even remember, and he had some really significant, memory loss from, his injuries, which were pretty, really significant, obviously. We spent like 2 or 3 hours like little kids giggling in there, trying not to wake the parents up, just telling stories and laughing. And I was just like, man, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And then we, when we got back to my house, my driveway was probably 50 yards long, and the car drops us off at the curb, and my wife's waiting at the door, opens the front door of the house, and she just starts bawling from 50 yards away. She goes, "What happened to you? You look 20 years younger. I cannot believe this is the same person." And then, and that's how it all began. And then I can't remember how long the interim was before he contacted me about Marcus, but said, "Hey, we need to get the same thing done for Marcus." And I was like, "All right, let's do it." And so I'm pretty sure by that time the clinic had closed, right? And we did that in a little more gray condition.
I mean, just hearing this story from you, Kirk, this is wild. Like, I didn't know any of this, by the way, obviously from some of your past speaking about it, but the issues with obviously his TBI, that you said, hey, he's recalling stuff so quickly that you were blown away, right? I mean, it's the same thing Amber will tell you, right? Like, that's the first thing she knows. She's like, this wasn't, well, how we define mental health, but she said, I could barely screw in a light bulb to all of a sudden being able to make lists and strategize and think clearly and play chess and I didn't know any of this, like I said, of our mutual friend here. So it's pretty remarkable that you saw this.
I didn't know some of those details either.
Experienced this. I think it's it is such a team guy thing where, Doc, you're like, I talked to one person, I had lunch. They said this thing might help our teammates, but it could also kill them. And you're like, okay. And you do some research, and then the issue gets presented to you and you go, yeah, so I think we have this thing that we can take care of you with, you know.
Yeah.
You know, and I just say, and he's talked about this, so I can mention him. Coleman Ruiz was the same way. Coleman said he literally read every professional that he could find globally, every book that was written, everything on psychedelic treatments from every expert. And he said it wasn't until a 30-second conversation on the phone with his friend, it was me, that was like, yeah, I'm good. I'm convinced now. Let's go. It's funny how that works.
Trust is so paramount to the SEAL community. And so when we were struggling, and we didn't plan to talk about this, but there's a scene in the film where I find Marcus with an empty bottle of whiskey and a loaded gun. And the reason that I found him like that was because I heard two guys' voices, and it was the middle of the night, and I thought, who is in my house? And our friend had come over, and he was there for Marcus, and that's the only reason. You know, something had alarmed him or something. He came over, and that's the only reason that they knew that we were struggling. So, you know, I'm so thankful that situation happened, or else, you know, they wouldn't have known. And when he came back from Mexico with you, his wife reached out and said, I think there's something that could help Marcus.
Yeah.
I approached him about it, and he was like, absolutely not. That's crazy. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the first thing I said. Is like, this is the first thing you said. Yeah. You know, I didn't even think about like the high, you know, getting high, or people just want to get high. I just thought, oh, these are the videos I used to watch growing up. You know, both my parents were hippies, but they went to Woodstock. You know, if I heard about psychedelics, it may have been through them, but I had no idea that they were intended for mental health treatments or substance use disorder, PTSD, et cetera.
Yeah, ibogaine is really an interesting one too.
I mean, I'd love to go back though. I mean, when I met you first, Kirk, you know, we had this conversation where you said, you know, I got to get out. The gray beards won't listen to me about what's actually working for these individuals. Mm-hmm. And I think you were the first one. I don't know if I started testosterone replacement therapy at that time. I don't think I had the cash for it. I may have been given peptides through your counsel at the time, because again, it's when you started looking at individuals and saying, hey, let's look at your whole body and figure out what's going on. You know, and obviously I want to talk a little bit about that, because you are the one, you know, I would call you the genesis of the community starting testosterone replacement therapy, looking into peptides, sleeping, like everything that you're discussing now and everything that's sort of popular, if you want to call popular now. I feel, you know, I'll go back saying you started that in my opinion.
You were pioneering a lot of that a long time ago.
And I would also say, I think the special operations community pioneered beards again. I think beards are cool, and everyone's wearing beards because the war started and people started growing beards. Next thing you know, then athletes started growing beards, and everyone wanted to be an operator. And next thing you know, now beards are cool.
That's why God's hand was on it to where I had to just be a SEAL when I was young and then get out, because I can't grow a beard. So I could have never been part of your generation of SEALs, man. If I don't shave for 3 days, you can see a couple of whiskers on my chin. Yeah, but well, I mean, that really goes back to, you know, to what I alluded to earlier, is just, you know, the reason I was able to be helpful to the teams was because the guys trusted me, right? So you know as well as anyone that, you know, SEALs don't, you know, you don't trust the medical guys by and large. That's the guy who can put you on the bench. So unless you have something really specific you want to talk to him about that you know isn't going to disqualify you, by and large, they didn't talk to the docs about it, right? But because, you know, like I said, because I'd been there recently enough to where there's still a lot of guys around who knew me well, and I obviously had a good enough reputation for them to trust me, and they'd come in the office and shut the door behind them and say, "Hey, man, just between you and me, let me tell you what's going on with me," right? Now, when I got there, they already knew that SEALs had problems with testosterone. We'll just call it anabolic hormones in general. all the anabolic hormone profiles in SEALs were low. The catabolic hormones were high. Inflammation was high. Oxidation was high. So what their labs really looked like was, a 50-year-old pre-diabetic dude who was 50 pounds overweight, right? Like that's if I took the personal information off and gave their labs to a colleague, that's probably who they would predict I was showing them, right? When I got there, they already knew that these problems existed, but they didn't really know why. And they'd done a little examination, and and just very superficial ignorance led them to the conclusion that the guys who had low testosterone were guys who had abused steroids in the past. Well, again, I knew the guys, I knew a lot of the guys having problems, right? And they came in and talked to me, and we know who the guys are who do that stuff, right? And I knew for a fact, the guys sitting in my office, I knew they were not the guys who did that, right? And I was like, I don't think that's it. And and the way the community is, because somebody came and talked to me, and I took them seriously, and I honestly said, I don't know. I'm trained as a Western physician, and I know how to identify, like recognize and treat diseases. And what you're displaying is not a disease. You just aren't performing as well as you'd like to perform. And I don't really know what to do about that, but we'll figure it out together, right? And so I literally sent them to the hospital. My plan was just, I will have them do every lab marker, serum, marker that I know how to interpret. And that was the decision point. Whether or not it went in the panel was whether or not I knew what it meant, and I had any idea what I could do about any of it. So I sent these guys over, pulling 17 vials of blood. It was about $1,800 per guy. So that was one of the first things that upset the powers that be. After I'd sent 300 dudes over there, they're wondering what are you doing here? You're spending a whole lot of money. What the guys in my office were complaining about, right? They were coming in talking about their mood and their motivation and their cognition and their memory, and just their body composition shifts, and feeling weaker and feeling slower, and doing everything the nutritionists and trainers are telling them to do and still not performing well, and snappy emotionally, snappy with their kids, snappy with their wives, but they were SEALs. So not a single guy ever told me that they had a problem sleeping. No, not one person complained about sleep, but they told me all their lifestyle issues, right? And all their problems. And probably, I'm ashamed to say how many people were in my office before I kind of, and a bell went off, light bulb went off in my head. And I said, it seems like a lot of guys, he told me he took Ambien, and it seems like a lot of guys said they take Ambien. And so I made a note in the margin, and I, kept on with the interview. And then after he left, I went through my shadow files, and this is another reason the guys trusted me, is I didn't put anything in their medical records. I made their own medical records for my office. It's called a shadow file. And then I just give them their shadow file when I'm done and say, hey, you should put this in your medical record, right? And so I covered myself kind of that way. Like I that still wasn't really popular when they found out I was doing that, but it was legal. And so I went back through everybody's files, and every single guy who had been in my office was taking Ambien. And I said, I wonder what that could do. I, like every other Western trained physician, I hadn't had a single class in medical school on sleep. So I didn't know anything about sleep that anybody else didn't know. I didn't know any more than the SEALs sitting in my office about sleep. I went through Hell Week 2. I knew sleep was probably just an optional luxury that you did when you had time. And so I started educating myself about sleep to try to figure out if I thought that this Ambien could be a factor. And I started doing some research on Ambien and the lawsuits against them and the side effects of it. And I came to the conclusion, once I learned enough, and then one thing I had going for me, was being a doctor for the West Coast SEALs at that time. I could really call anybody, right? I could read somebody's book, see somebody's TED Talk, hear somebody present, and just call them and say, hey, I'm the doctor for the West Coast SEAL teams. Could I ask you some questions? Could I come train with you? Could I consult with you? Could you teach me this? And I got to learn a lot really quickly that way. I got to learn from a lot of experts. So it was a learning curve I could have never achieved without that advantage. But anyway, I came up, once I learned how, well, all your hormones are regulated while you're asleep. That's when it's done, right? That's when 95% of all the testosterone you're going to produce in a day happens while you're asleep. And all of your stress hormones are regulated, all your anabolic hormones, all of your inflammation, oxidation, all of that gets managed and reset for the next day while you're asleep. And so I said, well, let's see what happens if we get everybody off of Ambien. And so, I couldn't just take away the Ambien and say, suck it up, because obviously they were taking Ambien because they couldn't sleep. And so I got them to, I got guys to get off of Ambien, and I just gave them over-the-counter supplementations that I'd looked up on just regular, like Cochrane database, kind of very conservative, normal Western medical sites, like what helps with sleep and why, and then I had, the SEALs help me figure out how much they needed, because that wasn't really known, and we spent about 6 months coming up with a worksheet that I would give guys and say, hey, go buy all of these supplements. I'd convert their Ambien to a serum so they could go from 10 drops to 9 drops to 8 drops, like that. And they could titrate down 1 milligram a week, got everybody off of Ambien. And then I think what I was doing with you, Marcus, I was giving guys DHEA and pregnenolone and either zinc citrate as an aromatase inhibitor, or sometimes I was giving an aromatase inhibitor. And just kind of giving people an opportunity to produce more, to make sure they had the substrates to make hormones. And then I was giving omega-3s to kind of decrease inflammation, because there was a big inflammation problem. And lo and behold, once guys started sleeping well, their testosterone tripled, quadrupled. Their growth hormone doubled, tripled. Inflammation went from being like off the charts high to unmeasurable. Oxidation markers went down. They started performing better. Body composition started shifting, and it wasn't 100% solution, but it was about an 80% solution for probably 80% of the guys. Because it took me probably another year to figure out how much TBI was involved in that, and that was, that's its own story. But then once I started having some success with that, then the military wanted me to start lecturing on that. And so at the pre and post retreats, I started lecturing on it. And I just called that combination of symptoms the SEAL syndrome, because I lack imagination, and I like alliterations, I guess. And so I said, it's the SEAL syndrome, and here's what people complain of. Here's what happens when we fix it. Here's how you fix it. Here's the worksheet. And that was kind of it. And then after I got out of the teams and I went into private practice, the SEALs were tired of having to go around and buy, 6 different ingredients at 3 different health food stores. As pre-Amazon Prime, you couldn't just order stuff to your door. Some things were powders, and some things were liquids, and some things were capsules, and some came in 90 and some came in 30. And so they were like, dude, just make a product for us. And so, I made it into a little stick pouch that guys could throw a handful in their pocket and, have a week's supply. And Rob Wolf and I partnered on launching that, and with the intention of like, we'll just make this, we'll sell it back to the SEAL team so that the guys have something for them. That was 11 years ago. I still don't have any contract to sell it to the SEAL teams, but it turned out to be a profitable business, and I still run that company to this day, and that kind of further solidified me as the sleep guy. Although, whatever, it's 20%, 25% of what I do, but that's what I'm known for now because of my time with the teams. And now the other caveat of that is, what I didn't get into is I constantly got, how should I say, reprimanded and investigated and paused in my practice while I was working with the SEALs for practicing outside of my scope, because this isn't what they hired me to do. But obviously I was there to help the SEALs. I didn't really care what Bureau of Medicine wanted me to do or what Navy medicine wanted me to do. I was going to help my brothers. And so I was like, all right, I'll do that. But because that made so much noise, some people from Navy Health and Research Center over in Point Loma came over there's 4 of them came over to my office and they said, "Hey, we kind of heard about what's going on. Can you tell us what you found?" And I spent the better part of a day on a whiteboard and showing them all my lab values and telling them what I'd found and what I was finding the solution to be. At this point, I already knew about the TBI component, so I talked to them about that as well. And then they started doing research on all of it, and literally, as far as I know, validated every claim I told them. Like everything I told them I thought was true, I think they validated. And y'all know, Chris obviously has published a book on it, and he wasn't one of the original researchers, but he was part of that NHRC, I believe, at some point. Yeah, and that's the story of how I got to be here doing this, and now I still work with foundations and I help guys when they come out of their career. When guys finish being SEALs for 20 years and they're a bag of bones and their brains don't work very well. I work with them for a year and the foundations pay for whatever treatments I prescribe for them. And, sometimes it's psychedelics and sometimes it's hyperbarics and sometimes it's both. And it's usually hormones and usually some peptides and usually some supplements and all of that. And that's it, man. I got nothing else to say. That's all I know.
Well, thank you for the pioneering work that you do. I mean, obviously, like our family has benefited so much from your willingness to think outside the box. And I've said so many times that this is a very unconventional group of guys and like thinking unconventionally. I mean, you were like the pioneer of this entire thing. And Marcus and I have just been blessed enough to pick up the mantle and try to find a way, to your earlier point, how are you going to pay for this? When he came through treatment, and Marcus, you can talk more about this specifically, but he said, this is it. This is exactly what the guys need. And like fundamentally, how are they going to pay for it?
Yeah, that was my big thing, Kirk, is that I felt that, I was lucky enough to have someone pay for my treatment. Right. And I'll never forget.
And Kirk helped arrange that, by the way, and Mikal.
And Kirk, you had arranged that.
That was actually me too. We ran it through Mikal's organization.
Thank you. If we haven't said it enough, I want the whole world to know how grateful we are.
I was happy to do it, man. I wasn't going to let a brother suffer if I could help with it,
Well, we're going to pay that back to you. But that was the idea of starting an organization to say, okay, these treatments are so expensive. How the heck is a person coming out of the military supposed to pay for $5,000 or $6,000, or actually like now $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 for a treatment?
That's the exact problem I had continuing my work, right? Because when I was working with SEALs in the Navy, it was all, everything I did was covered by the military, right? And then once I got out, these guys are like, what am I going to do? I'm like, I don't know. Like for the first probably 5 or 6 years, all the guys I worked with, they just had to pay for all their own stuff. And I would just say, hey, like, I'm never going to charge you for my time. But you're going to have to pay for your own medicines and your own supplements and your own treatments and all that other stuff. And everything's expensive, and the psychedelics are obviously expensive, but hyperbarics is $8,000, and, a lot of the peptides can be, some of those can be a couple of grand a month once you start adding all that stuff up too. Yeah.
It does add up very quickly. I love, Kirk, that you are focused on the foundation. Like sleep is such an important foundation. And I feel that psychedelics are really, I'd say a good step one in some cases, where you can just lay that foundation and then all these other things can be even more effective. We did it the opposite way. Marcus tried so many things that didn't work. And I think for guys like you, both, you're used to setting out to achieve something, achieving the goal, moving on. And he was getting so frustrated, which actually takes me back to the year that passed whenever I brought up ibogaine to you. I didn't even know what it was. It took you a year to commit. And during that year, you were trying all these things and they weren't working. What was that like, Marcus?
Well, I think like everything else, I think you have to commit and be disciplined to do a lot of these different things. And Kirk, you'll be the first to say, getting individuals off of Ambien and giving them, quote unquote, some natural supplements to help them sleep, it's not going to happen overnight. So if you talk to them on Monday, like Monday night, Tuesday night, this may take weeks, it may take months. It's discipline. Yeah. We can't go to the gym for a month, expect to be in shape for the rest of our life. And so I think, sticking with it. And I think that's why sometimes individuals who come out and they're so angry at the world, they're isolated, they're, everything that you spoke about before, you have to get back to a baseline of feeling good before you want to move forward and start some of these other things. And so I think everybody's got a different path of where they're starting, but getting themselves, I think, to a better place before they're open, like their mind is open to trying new, different, better things.
And I think also what's underappreciated is like you have to be metabolically and physiologically healthy enough to repair. Coming out of tier 1, like y'all, I mean, guys come out of this and they are beaten up, right? Like, the decades of just completely abusing their bodies. And, we know there's toxin buildups in them from ordnance and non-exploded ordnance and burn pits and, all the stuff that we do. And we know there's a ton of overpressurization injuries in the brain that are causing brain inflammation. And this chaotic sleep cycle that's been going on forever, and guys living off of MREs and like who knows nutritionally what they did to themselves during that period of time. And
a lot of alcohol.
Right. And then a lot
of vaccines.
Yeah. And then living in a community where it's like, well, okay, any medication that you take is going to be disqualifying. So it's like, all right, well, this one in the bottle, that one's completely legal, right? So that's the one I'm going to use. And I'm going to be able to, I'm going to self-medicate with that, right? But what people don't understand is like when you get these overpressurization injuries and you have this chaotic sleep cycles and chronic sleep deprivations and head injuries and overtraining and overuse and chronic inflammation, and then you try to self-medicate with alcohol and sleep drugs, and then you have poor sleep, and that exacerbates the inflammation and further upsets the hormonal balance, and just the pressure from the swelling in the brain from what's happened in your life. The brain doesn't have any place to swell, right? It doesn't have any place to inflame too. So when it's inflamed, all it does is create pressure in the skull. And that pressure then starts impacting your brain function. And your brain is the master of all of your hormones, which is the master of all of your physiology. And so your body just simply doesn't work at that point. And your brain's not simply, and things just aren't simply working well enough. So it's not as simple as just coaching somebody on lifestyle, because you have to get rid of a lot of that brain inflammation. And, and obviously the psychedelics are amazing at that. But the other component is, after years of a brain chronically dysfunctioning, that central nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, the amygdala tone that's leading to this hyper alert environment and in this hyper anxious and anxiety environment, the psychedelics calm all of that down too, right? And so you decrease that amygdala tone, you decrease that inflammation, you give that brain some room to work. And then, getting rid of that amygdala tone that allows you to not be hypervigilant all the time and not be thinking everybody's trying to kill you or everything's a threat or everybody's thinking something horrible about you, or all of the kind of the brain games, or that you're falling apart, or that you're dying, or maybe you have cancer, or all the kind of things that, that enter your brain when you have this, chronically kind of beat down physiology. It's impossible to just say, well, start eating well and start sleeping well and you'll be fine, right? It doesn't work that way. It's like our guys need help. Like guys who's been through a situation like that, they need expertise, they need help, they need powerful things. Hyperbarics is a very powerful tool. Psychedelics is a very powerful tool. Hormones are very powerful. Peptides are very powerful. These aren't just things you can go do by yourself, right? You can't just read a book and you can't just say, well, I'm going to set an alarm clock and be very good about my discipline around light before I go to bed. Like it's not that easy. And so I completely recognize the struggle that our community, and obviously there's other communities that are very similar. And anybody, all the first responders and cops who shift work their whole lives and all that, they all have very similar problems. it's finally getting on the radar, and y'all have been an amazing component of that. And one of my colleagues I respect the most is Dan Engel. I'm sure you guys know him, and he's both a neurologist and a psychologist, and he's obviously a very smart, very introspective, and a measured, sober, judicious guy. I remember him telling me really, really early in this. He said, all of psychology and all of neurology together, if you take all of their tools, all of that combined is not as powerful as one weekend with these types of substances. And I was like,
wow,
that's a big claim. But coming from him, he's not a hyperbolic guy, right? So he, like I said, very sober and judicious guy. And that was a very thought out comment. And I believe him. I believe him, man.
I would say objective guy, right? Like he has seen and probably prescribed everything and have seen everything. And for him to say that is, wow. I haven't heard that. So, hearing that for the first time from you is saying,
he's definitely
wow.
like a level 9 wizard at all this stuff, man. They're just, I don't know if y'all know that about him, but he also like went down and lived in the Amazon with a shaman, and board certified in neurology and board certified in psychology. So there are very few guys in the world with his pedigree to be able to make a statement like that.
Yeah.
So the mission at Vets has been incredibly blessed. Everything from just your shepherding in the initial days to, I truly feel it's divinely blessed. It's just
it absolutely
happening.
is.
And
Absolutely.
speaking of Texas, how crazy is that Texas ibogaine win? Which will unlock $100 million to start FDA clinical trials on ibogaine. So people don't have to leave the United States, hopefully one day, to access the therapy. It's monumental. Go Texas.
Yeah. I'm proud to be a Texan when they came out with that. I know y'all were instrumental in that. Certainly going to be the most impactful thing that's ever been done for veterans.
Wow. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. I'm just trying to keep up with what seems to be organically happening.
Yeah.
Luckily, I'm rather strategic thinker and big problem solver, but never in a million years did I think that what started with, the initial trip for ibogaine that you helped arrange would turn into this.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Kirk, there's always going to be veterans that are going to be listening to this. And I never just want to just speak without them walking away with something that they can do or something they can work on. You have so much knowledge. So if that veteran's out there and they're listening to this, whether it's a SEAL, whether it's a Marine, an Air Force guy, an Army grunt, or whatever, what can you tell that person, that guy, that girl, that they can just take away from this and go, that guy, Doc Parsley, said this on a podcast, and I'm going to do that, and it's going to help me get better. Because I feel like, you can say 3 to 5, you talked about a bunch of stuff here, but like, what's one thing they can do to maybe help them kind of climb out of a bad place or just help them get back on track?
Where things get really hard is when people give up, when they just give up on believing that there's a possibility that tomorrow could be better than today. When they're just like, I don't see any way it's going up. My functioning sucks. The most powerful thing to do in that situation is at least have enough hope to ask for help, right? To admit to yourself that you don't know everything and that there might be somebody out there who knows how to help you. And that you should exhaust that, because as long as there's breath in your lungs and blood in your veins, you've got a chance, right? There's a chance to get better. Shame, right? Like they feel ashamed or self-conscious about asking for help, as though they should be able to fix this on their own, and it maybe means they're unworthy if they can't fix it on their own. And that's just not the case, right? Everybody gets better. Like every single person I've ever worked with gets better. And it doesn't take any kind of magic. It just takes some knowledge. It takes some people who have some tools and some understanding. Things can get a lot better, a lot faster than you think. And so if you're really struggling, ask for help. If you're just minor struggling, then start doing your own research on lifestyle and sleep and nutrition and exercise. I mean, really, if you can figure out a way to eat well and sleep well and exercise regularly, and I'm not talking about budge training, just some type of activity, that improves mitochondrial biogenesis and overall physiology, hormones, and circulation and all that. Just some moderate activity and get good sleep and get and eat well. Just primarily meaning, don't live off of fast food or Funyuns and Mountain Dew or something like that. Just eat some decent food, and you'll be surprised that you will feel significantly better just from getting those things.
You actually talked about everything and everything you can do. So I'll bring it back to when I asked the questions, and what you started with is ask for help. And the three guys that we talked about on the show, me being one of them, Mikal being the other, and then our third mutual friend, we were all in a really bad, really dark place. And we didn't want anything. We didn't see any hope. We didn't see any purpose. And we all asked for help, right? Mikal came into you every day. He asked for help. And by the way, I'm not going to I'll put myself in the category, but those two individuals are extremely hard, tough, some of the baddest dudes I know. And they raise their hand and they raise their hand and they ask for help. And I raised my hand and asked for help. So if you're sitting out there, the first thing you can do, if you think that you can't turn to anybody, is pick up the phone, call someone, and ask them or tell them that you need a lifeline. You need some help here, and you're trying to figure it out and go from there.
I do think that there's something about true strength being found in the depths of vulnerability. Like, to me, I think that you guys are kind of hardwired to be like, oh, I can't be vulnerable. But to me, that's really what true strength is.
Yeah, I'm past that point.
And if you think about also the hope and power of one life, because our mutual friend is still here, because you were able to intervene, he was able to help Marcus. And, collectively, we've all been able to help countless others.
Yeah, thousands of people. I'm saying collective, like all of us here.
Yeah.
About, so.
Well, it's everyone who comes through the program. They want to help too, and a lot of them have been right up to the line of suicide. So
there are few men on the planet harder than our mutual friend, right? I mean, that dude is the definition of tough and hard. If I know anybody, that's who I think of when somebody says, who's the hardest, toughest 100%. Man you've ever known?
We're around the toughest individuals that I've ever known, and they're doing all these things because they want to get better. And that's all that matters. You're known as the sleep doc. I always refer to you as the sleep doc, Kirk Parsley, because oh yeah, Kirk. But thank you for coming on our show. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. I love you, and we should talk and do this more just offline, because I know we can help each other. I almost feel bad that we haven't done more together, but we'll work on that in the future.
Yeah, we had to divide and conquer, man. So there's nothing to feel bad about with it. There's so many people that need help, but we're both working in the same direction, and I love what you guys are doing. I respect both of you, and I would always be honored to be helpful in any capacity I could be for y'all. So that's always there. Y'all have a lot of really smart guys now in that world, though, who know way more about psychedelics than I do. So
no,
it's just one tool in the box, as you were talking about today. There's many different treatments that we need to be doing. So yeah, I guess to wrap it. So thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for listening today. We'll see you next week. Stay tuned. We will drop all the information that you need in the show notes,
including a link to Doc Parsley's sleep remedy.
Yeah, and his future and this big project that he's working on. We're really excited to see when it's complete. And on that note, bye.
Right. Yeah, I guess we're out.
Ciao,
all right.